I reached into my sock drawer, felt past the heavy wool hiking socks, and pulled out the small navy blue velvet box. When I turned around with it in my hand, her mouth was open mid-sentence, but nothing came out. Her whole face went gray. Her hands dropped from her hips, and all that arrogance just drained right out of her as she stared at the box, then at the suitcase, then at me. I was sitting on our couch at 8 o'clock in the morning on what should have been the best night of my life, still wearing the same navy button-down and pressed slacks from the evening before. The fabric was wrinkled now, creased from hours of waiting in positions no one was meant to hold for that long. I was watching my girlfriend of 3 years walk through the door, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the sight of her disheveled appearance or the guilty shuffle in her step. It was the smell, that unmistakable, invasive scent of her ex-boyfriend's cologne, mixing with stale beer and something else I couldn't quite place but knew didn't belong anywhere near our anniversary. The apartment behind me told a story she would never see. Unlit candles were arranged carefully on every surface, their wicks pristine and untouched, waiting for a match that would never come. On the kitchen counter sat a $200 bottle of wine, the kind she'd mentioned exactly once, 6 months ago, in passing conversation about her favorite things. I'd remembered because that's what you do when you love someone. You catalog the small details, the offhand comments, the fleeting preferences. You build a mental database of everything that makes them smile, and you use it to create moments of joy. That bottle represented hours of research, comparing vintages and reading reviews, making sure I got the exact right year from the exact right vineyard. It was supposed to pair with the dinner I'd booked 4 months in advance at that restaurant downtown, the one with the 6-month waiting list that I'd somehow managed to secure for our exact anniversary date. In my sock drawer, buried beneath heavy wool hiking socks in the back left corner, was a small navy blue velvet box. Inside that box was a platinum engagement ring with a 1.5-carat diamond that had cost me 6 months of deliberately skipped lunches and brown-bag sandwiches eaten at my desk. 6 months of passing on the vintage Ducati motorcycle I'd been eyeing, the one I'd bookmarked and revisited weekly, dreaming about weekend rides up the coast. 6 months of sacrifices I'd made gladly, eagerly even, because I thought I was investing in our future, in our forever. She dropped her keys on the console table, and the metallic clatter echoed through the silence like a gunshot in an empty cathedral. The sound seemed to bounce off every surface, amplifying in the stillness, announcing her presence in a way that felt almost violent. She didn't even look guilty yet. Not in those first few seconds. She just looked annoyed that I was awake, still sitting there in the dim morning light filtering through our curtains. She rubbed her temples theatrically, like she was the victim of some great inconvenience, like my presence in our shared apartment at 8 in the morning was somehow an imposition on her life. Then came the explanation, delivered with the kind of practiced casualness that told me she'd been rehearsing it on the drive home. Tyler was in a bad place, she said. He needed her. He'd called her right as we were supposed to leave for dinner, his voice breaking, threatening to do something stupid if she didn't come over. If I actually trusted her, she continued, her voice taking on that edge of righteous indignation, I would understand why she spent our anniversary getting drunk at his apartment instead of at the restaurant I'd booked months in advance. She said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like choosing her ex-boyfriend's emotional crisis over our 3-year anniversary was just basic human decency, and my hurt feelings were a moral failure on my part. I work as a civil engineer, and in my profession I've learned that emotional reactions don't change structural realities. A beam either holds the weight it's designed for or it doesn't. A foundation either cracks under pressure or stays solid. There's no middle ground, no room for interpretation or feelings or wishful thinking. The math is either correct or it isn't. The same principle, I've found, applies to relationships. Either trust exists or it doesn't. Either respect is present or it's absent. And sitting there at 8 in the morning, watching her perform this elaborate justification,
I realized I was looking at a cracked foundation.
I asked her one simple question. The kind of question an engineer asks when checking calculations, when verifying that the numbers actually add up to what someone claims they do. If Tyler was actively suicidal, if he was genuinely in crisis and threatening to harm himself, did you call emergency services? Did you call a suicide prevention hotline? Did you contact anyone actually trained in crisis intervention, anyone with the professional skills and legal authority to handle someone in that state of mind? Or did you decide, out of everyone in his entire life, every friend and family member and professional he could have reached out to, that you specifically were the only person who could save him? The question landed between us like a brick dropped from a great height, and I watched her face shift in real time. The annoyed confidence drained away, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like guilt seeping through the cracks in her carefully constructed defense. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She stammered something about how it wasn't that serious, that he just needed someone to talk to, that she knew him well enough to know he wasn't actually going to do anything. Which, of course, completely contradicted everything she'd just said about him being in such desperate need that missing our anniversary was justified. She pivoted quickly, like someone caught in a lie and trying to find solid ground. "They just had a drink to calm his nerves," she said. "Maybe 2 drinks. They fell asleep watching a movie on his couch. Nothing happened." She said those 2 words with particular emphasis, like they were supposed to erase everything else. Like physical fidelity was the only metric that mattered in measuring betrayal. And then she made her fatal mistake, her voice rising, taking on that sharp edge of someone who knows they're wrong but refuses to admit it. She shouted that I was insecure and jealous, that if I trusted her, if I really loved her, I would understand that she was just being a good person, helping a friend in need. That my reaction right now, my hurt and anger, said more about my issues than it did about her choices. That sentence killed everything we had. Not wounded it, not damaged it, not created a problem we could work through with enough time and effort in couples therapy. It killed it completely, instantly, like flipping a switch and watching the lights go out all at once. Because in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that she would never take responsibility. She would never acknowledge that choosing to spend our anniversary with her ex-boyfriend, coming home at 8 in the morning smelling like him, was a fundamental violation of our relationship. Instead, she was going to make this about my inadequacy, my jealousy, my failure to be understanding enough. I stood up from the couch, my legs stiff from sitting in the same position for hours, and walked past her to the bedroom without saying another word. I could feel her presence behind me, could sense her confusion at my silence, but I had nothing left to say. Words felt useless now, like trying to use language to fix something that was beyond verbal repair. I pulled my suitcase down from the closet shelf, the large navy one I'd bought for a trip we'd planned to take next summer, and started packing methodically. She followed me, of course, her voice getting higher and more frantic with each passing second. She laughed, this harsh, brittle sound that had nothing to do with humor, and told me I was being dramatic, that I was punishing her for helping a friend, that couples fight, couples have misunderstandings, and they don't just throw away 3 years over one night. She was working herself up into righteous anger now, transforming her guilt into grievance, making herself the victim of my unreasonable standards and excessive expectations. As I moved around the bedroom, pulling clothes from drawers and laying them carefully in the suitcase, I got closer to her. Close enough that the smell hit me with full force, and it told me everything her words were trying to hide. It wasn't the antiseptic smell of a hospital waiting room or crisis center. It wasn't the sterile scent of a police station or the coffee-stained atmosphere of an all-night diner where you'd sit with someone who was struggling. It was stale smoke from those fruit-flavored vapes Tyler constantly puffed on, the sickly sweet cherry or mango or whatever flavor he was currently obsessed with, the sour, yeasty smell of spilled beer, probably from that cheap craft IPA he always kept in his fridge. And underneath everything, soaked into her clothes and hair, was that aggressive, musky cologne he always wore, the kind that announced his presence from 20 feet away. I reached into my sock drawer, felt past the heavy wool hiking socks I wore on weekend camping trips, and pulled out the small navy blue velvet box. The weight of it in my hand felt different now, less like a promise and more like evidence. When I turned around with it held between my thumb and forefinger, her mouth was open mid-sentence, probably about to launch into another defense, another accusation, another deflection. But nothing came out. The words died in her throat. Her whole face went gray, the color draining so quickly it was almost frightening. Her hands, which had been gesturing emphatically on her hips in that aggressive stance she took when she was defensive, dropped to her sides like someone had cut the strings holding up a marionette. All that arrogance, all that righteous indignation, all that certainty that she was in the right and I was being unreasonable just drained right out of her as she stared at the box. Her eyes moved from the velvet box to the half-packed suitcase on the bed, then to my face, then back to the box, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. She started stammering, words tumbling out in a rush of panic and regret. If she had known about the ring, she said, she never would have picked up the phone. She would have told Tyler no, would have told him to leave her alone, would have blocked his number entirely. She swore it, her voice breaking, her hands reaching toward me but not quite touching, hovering in the space between us like she was afraid I'd disappear if she made contact. I stopped packing for exactly 1 second. I looked her dead in the eyes, holding her gaze until I was sure she was really listening, really hearing me, and told her that's the thing. That's exactly the problem. She shouldn't have needed a ring to know that our anniversary mattered. She shouldn't have needed the promise of marriage to understand that choosing her ex-boyfriend over our 3-year relationship was a betrayal. The ring was supposed to be a symbol of what we already had, not a bargaining chip that determined whether I deserved basic respect and loyalty. I slipped the box into my pocket, feeling its weight settle against my hip, and zipped the suitcase closed with a sound that felt final. I walked past her reaching hands, past her voice screaming my name in the hallway, past every memory we'd made in that apartment, out the door and down to my car parked on the street below. I drove away in complete silence. No radio, no podcast, just the sound of the engine and my own breathing. For the first 3 blocks, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was this strange, almost euphoric sensation, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there until I set it down. The city streets were quiet at that hour, just a few early commuters and delivery trucks, and I drove through them feeling like I was floating, untethered from everything that had been holding me down. Then, at a red light, something cracked open inside me. My hands started shaking on the wheel, trembling so hard I had to grip tighter to keep them steady. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, this wave of emotion I couldn't quite name, before I steadied my hands, looked at them like they belonged to someone else, and forced them still through pure will. But after that, after I breathed through it and let it pass, I genuinely felt lighter. The next 2 days exist in my memory as a blur of hotel rooms and silence. My phone vibrated constantly, a relentless buzzing that I learned to ignore, watching the screen light up with Brittany's name over and over again. She was cycling through the predictable pattern of someone losing their safety net, someone realizing too late what they'd thrown away. First came the bargaining messages, long paragraphs about throwing out all of Tyler's stuff, pictures of his belongings in trash bags to prove she was serious, begging me to just come home so we could talk this through. Because couples go through rough patches, she wrote. We don't throw away 3 years over one misunderstanding. Then came the anger phase. Shorter messages now, sharp and bitter. Texts calling me immature and a coward, saying I never really loved her if I could just walk away this easily, that I'd probably been looking for an excuse to leave for months, that I'd wanted out and was using this as justification, that I was punishing her for being a good person, for having empathy, for caring about someone who was struggling. The messages got meaner as the hours passed, attacking everything from my emotional availability to my worth as a partner. By Sunday afternoon, she'd deployed her entire friend network like flying monkeys, like she was the Wicked Witch sending out her army. Her best friend, Madison, called, and before I could even say hello, before I could get a single word out, she was shrieking into the phone. Brittany was literally on the floor sobbing, she said. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. And what I was doing, dangling an engagement ring in her face and then completely abandoning her, was psychological abuse. That's the word she used. Abuse. I was sitting in this uncomfortable hotel chair, the kind with scratchy upholstery and insufficient back support, watching traffic flow on the interstate below my window. Cars moving in neat lines, following rules, going where they were supposed to go. I felt this weird detachment from everything, like I was floating above my own life, watching it happen to someone else. I told Madison, my voice steady and calm in a way that surprised even me, exactly what happened. That Brittany came home at 8 in the morning smelling like Tyler's cologne and stale beer. That she missed a dinner I'd planned for 4 months, a reservation I'd fought to get. That she chose to spend our anniversary getting tipsy with her ex-boyfriend instead of me. She didn't save a life, I said. She went on a date. I told Madison that Brittany had until the end of the month to figure out the lease situation, that I'd pay my half of rent through month's end as legally required. Then she was completely on her own. I hung up mid-sentence while Madison was still sputtering about how cold I was being, how heartless, and methodically started blocking people. I blocked Madison first, watching her name disappear from my contacts with a satisfaction that felt clean and simple. Then I blocked Brittany's sister, Rachel, who I'd never particularly liked anyway, who'd always treated me like I wasn't quite good enough for her younger sister. Then her work friend, Sasha, who I barely knew, but who'd apparently been recruited into this campaign. I was just cutting out every avenue Brittany had to reach me through proxy, every backdoor channel she might use to get messages through. And it felt like taking control back, like reclaiming territory that had been occupied by someone else's drama. Each block was a small victory, a door closing, a boundary being set and reinforced. I could imagine them in some group chat somewhere, probably one I'd been discussed in many times before, coordinating their approach, dividing up the responsibility of making me feel guilty. Madison would take the emotional angle, Rachel would play the family card, Sasha would probably try the reasonable friend approach. They had their scripts, their assigned roles in this performance, and I was refusing to play my part. I was supposed to feel terrible, supposed to cave under the pressure of multiple people telling me I was wrong. Instead, I felt powerful. The messages didn't stop, of course. They found other ways. Mutual friends I hadn't blocked yet started reaching out, carefully at first, asking how I was doing in that tone people use when they're fishing for information. I could see through every one of them. They'd start with small talk, ease into asking about the breakup, then casually mention that they'd talked to Brittany and she was really struggling. Each conversation was a variation on the same theme, a subtle pressure to reconsider, to give her another chance, to remember all the good times we'd had. What none of them seemed to understand, or maybe they understood perfectly well and just didn't care, was that this wasn't about one bad decision. This wasn't about one night where she made a questionable choice. This was about the pattern those choices revealed. The fact that when presented with a choice between respecting our relationship and feeding her need for drama, for attention from her ex, she chose the latter without hesitation. The fact that even when confronted, she'd tried to make me feel crazy for having basic expectations. The fact that she'd weaponized the language of trust and turned my reasonable boundaries into evidence of my inadequacy. I started crafting a simple response that I used for everyone who reached out, something polite but firm, thanking them for their concern, but making it clear the decision was final. I didn't justify, didn't explain, didn't defend my choice. Just a simple statement that I'd made my decision and I'd appreciate it if they respected that. Most people backed off after that, uncomfortable with the firmness, unsure how to proceed when their subtle manipulation didn't work. But a few pushed harder, and those were the ones I had to cut loose entirely. Friendships that I'd thought were mine turned out to be more hers, people who'd only tolerated me as an extension of her. It was clarifying, in a painful way, seeing who was really in my corner versus who was just part of the social ecosystem that had grown up around our relationship.
Each person I blocked, each friendship I let go, felt like pruning dead weight, cutting away the parts of my life that weren't actually serving me. Monday morning arrived, and I went to work like absolutely nothing had happened. I showered at the hotel, the water pressure terrible, but the privacy absolute, put on a clean shirt I'd packed, and walked into the office at my normal time.
I threw myself completely into spreadsheets and structural load analysis, into the clean logic of engineering problems that had definitive solutions. When you're dealing with betrayal, when your whole personal life has just imploded in spectacular fashion, there's something incredibly soothing about mathematics. Math is honest in a way people never are. Math doesn't lie to you, doesn't tell you one thing while doing another. Math doesn't gaslight you about where it was last night or what it was doing or who it was with. 2 plus 2 will never call its X at midnight because it's confused or in a bad place or needs closure. The equations either balanced or they didn't, with no gray area, no interpretation needed, no reading between the lines or wondering if something means what it obviously means. No one tells you that structural engineering formulas don't require trust, don't ask you to ignore your instincts, don't make you feel crazy for believing what you can clearly see. I worked through lunch every day that week, staying at my desk with a protein bar and coffee, focusing on load calculations and stress analysis with an intensity that my coworkers probably found concerning. I stayed late a few nights, the office quiet and empty, just me and the hum of computers and the satisfying click of my keyboard. My manager actually commented on Thursday that I seemed really focused lately, asked if everything was okay at home. I told him everything was fine. Better than fine, actually, that I'd just had some personal changes that freed up a lot of mental energy. He looked at me strangely, but didn't push, probably assuming I'd broken up with someone and was throwing myself into work as a coping mechanism. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he also wasn't entirely right. This wasn't avoidance, this was reconstruction. By Wednesday, Brittany's angry texts had completely stopped and been replaced with something way more pathetic. Desperate messages about missing me, about not being able to sleep, finding my gray hoodie in the closet and sleeping in it every night because it still smelled like my cologne, calling in sick to work because she couldn't function, because every little thing reminded her of me. Long paragraphs about how she'd ruined the best thing in her life, how she'd never forgive herself, how if she could just give her one more chance, she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. I read every single message without responding, just let them pile up on my phone like evidence in a court case, evidence that she finally understood what she'd thrown away, what she'd traded for a night of nostalgia and validation from someone who'd never really valued her. Each message was a small confirmation that I'd made the right choice, that walking away had been the only move that made sense. There was something almost clinical about it, watching her spiral through my phone screen while feeling absolutely nothing but a distant kind of satisfaction. By Thursday evening, scrolling through another wave of desperate messages, I realized something that felt like a physical shift in my chest. I wasn't waiting for her to apologize anymore. I wasn't waiting for the perfect apology that would make sense of everything, that would explain why she'd made those choices. I wasn't waiting for anything from her. The anger had burned out, leaving behind only this clear, cold certainty that we were done. That's when I knew, with absolute conviction, that I wasn't going back. The image of her face when she saw that ring box was permanently burned into my brain, seared there like a photograph. That moment of horrified realization when everything clicked into place and she understood the magnitude of what she'd done, what she'd destroyed.
About 3 weeks later, I had to swing by the apartment to grab the rest of my stuff, the things I'd left behind in that first hurried exit. I timed it carefully for a Tuesday morning when I knew she had a team meeting at work, one of those mandatory weekly check-ins she always complained about but never missed. I didn't want a confrontation, didn't want to give her the opportunity to stage some tearful reunion attempt or force me into another conversation about chances and mistakes and growth. The apartment looked completely trashed when I let myself in with the key I'd forgotten to leave behind. It looked like her internal state made physical, manifested in the material world. Takeout containers covered every surface in the kitchen, stacked on the counter and piled in the sink, some of them growing things that might have once been food. Mountains of dirty laundry covered the sofa where we used to watch movies, where I'd held her during scary parts, where we'd fallen asleep tangled together on lazy Sundays. The whole place smelled stale and neglected, like no one had opened a window or taken out the trash in weeks. I moved through the space methodically, trying not to look too closely at the evidence of her decline. I packed my books from the shelves we'd assembled together one Saturday afternoon, arguing cheerfully about the instructions. My espresso machine from the kitchen counter, the expensive one I'd saved up for that made perfect cappuccinos she'd wake up to on weekends. The rest of my clothes from the closet, careful not to touch her things, not to disturb the careful chaos she'd created. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, taking back things that had gotten absorbed into the shared life we'd built. As I was loading the last box into my car, my arms full and my back complaining about the stairs, Mrs. Patterson walked by with her pug Winston, the overweight dog who always snorted when he breathed. She was one of those sweet elderly neighbors who noticed everything, who kept track of comings and goings with benign curiosity rather than malicious gossip. She mentioned she hadn't seen me around lately, her voice careful and kind, not prying but concerned. Then she added, almost apologetically, that a young man with a loud muffler had been parking in my spot, my old designated parking spot, the one that came with our lease. He'd been there almost every night for the past 2 weeks, playing music at all hours, the bass thumping through the building's old walls. The other tenants had been complaining to the building manager about the noise and the exhaust smell from his poorly maintained car. Tyler had already latched onto his new host less than a month after I left, moved right into the warm spot I'd vacated, probably never even changed the sheets. The speed of it should have hurt, should have felt like another betrayal, but instead it just felt predictable. Of course he had. Of course she'd let him. They deserved each other, really. 2 people who chose drama and chaos over stability and peace. I told Mrs. Patterson to feel free to complain to the building manager as much as she wanted, because I was off the lease as of the 1st of the month. Wasn't my spot anymore, wasn't my problem, wasn't my responsibility to care about who was keeping the neighbors awake or leaving exhaust stains on the concrete. I felt this wave of nausea rise up, thinking about him in my space, using my things, sleeping in my bed, followed immediately by pure relief that washed it away. None of this was my problem anymore. Not the mess, not the noise complaints, not the drama, not her bad decisions.
Over the next few months, I heard through mutual acquaintances, the ones who hadn't taken sides or who were too curious to completely cut contact with both of us, that Brittany had immediately tried to recreate what we had, except with Tyler. She was trying to transform him from struggling DJ into responsible partner, like she could force him into the role I'd played through sheer willpower and determination. She apparently believed that the problem with our relationship had been me, not her choices, and that with the right person, her vision of domestic bliss would materialize effortlessly. Tyler moved into my old spot in the apartment within 2 weeks, brought his equipment and his clothes and his collection of half-empty vape cartridges. According to Sarah, a mutual friend who occasionally updated me with the kind of horrified fascination people have for car crashes, Brittany was ecstatic at first. She posted photos of them together, captions about second chances and finding your person and knowing when something is right. She was performing happiness on social media, trying to prove to everyone, maybe especially to me, that she'd made the right choice. But Tyler was Tyler, and Tyler had never pretended to be anything other than what he was. He borrowed $3,000 from her within the first month, money for new DJ equipment that would help him book better gigs, launch his career, finally make the breakthrough he'd been working toward for years. The gigs never materialized, of course. The equipment sat in the corner of their bedroom, gathering dust, occasionally used when his friends came over to drink and make noise until 3 in the morning. She paid for everything, while he contributed nothing.
Rent, utilities, groceries, his car insurance when he couldn't make the payment, his phone bill when he forgot to pay it. She became his mother and his bank and his emotional support system, and he accepted it all with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been expected to be responsible for himself. When she finally worked up the courage to ask him to contribute something, anything, or at least clean up after himself and his friends who treated the apartment like a frat house, he told her she was stifling his creativity and being too controlling. Those words, according to Sarah, who heard them directly from Madison, who heard them from Brittany, were delivered with genuine indignation, like her expecting him to be a functional adult was an unreasonable demand, an attack on his artistic soul, like paying rent and washing dishes would somehow destroy whatever creative spark he believed he possessed. He accused her of trying to turn him into some corporate drone, some boring regular guy who worked 9 to 5 and gave up on his dreams. She'd chosen chaos, I thought, when Sarah told me this over coffee one afternoon. She'd looked at the stable, predictable life we were building and decided it wasn't exciting enough. She'd wanted passion and intensity and someone who made her feel alive in ways my steady reliability apparently didn't. Now she got it. Now she had someone who made her feel intensely anxious about money, passionately frustrated about his refusal to grow up, alive with stress about whether the rent would get paid. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd accused me of being too focused on work, too practical, too boring in my stability. She'd wanted someone spontaneous, someone artistic, someone who lived in the moment. Tyler was all of those things, and none of them were actually desirable in a partner. Spontaneous meant unreliable. Artistic meant unemployed. Living in the moment meant having no plan for the future and no ability to delay gratification.
The final nail in that particular coffin came about 4 months after I left. I was out getting food with my buddy Chris, one of the few friends who'd somehow managed to stay neutral through the whole breakup drama, who still followed both of us on social media because he'd known us separately before we got together. We were at this burger place downtown, the kind with craft beers and overpriced fries, having a normal conversation about work and sports and nothing particularly important. Halfway through our meal, Chris slid his phone across the table with that expression people get when they have gossip that's too good not to share, but feel slightly guilty about enjoying it. He told me I needed to see this, his voice careful, watching my face for a reaction. It was Brittany's social media story, the kind that disappears after 24 hours but lives forever in screenshots. Just text on a black background, white letters that probably took her 20 minutes to compose, trying to sound profound and hurt and wise all at once. It said something about throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you for someone who treats you like just an option when they're bored, about some lessons you learned too late, about realizing what you had only after it's gone, about the people who loved you right being the ones you took for granted. All the performative sadness and public vulnerability that social media encourages, the kind of post that invites sympathy and concern from people who don't know the full story. Chris told me, leaning forward conspiratorially, that Tyler had cheated on her with a 19-year-old club promoter. Some girl he'd met at one of his gigs who'd promised she could get him better venues, more exposure, connections in the industry. Brittany had come home early from work one afternoon, probably exhausted from carrying the financial weight of 2 adults on her salary alone, and found them together in our old bed, the bed we'd picked out together, that we'd argued about regarding firmness and price, where we'd spent 3 years of nights. I laughed. I couldn't help it. This short, sharp bark of laughter that came from somewhere deep in my chest, surprising even me with its genuine amusement. It made the couple at the next table look over, probably thinking I was rude or crazy, laughing at something on a phone while trying to eat. But the irony was too perfect, too circular, too absolutely predictable to react any other way. She'd chosen him because he was exciting and passionate and made her feel desired in ways she claimed I didn't. She'd thrown away 3 years of loyalty and stability for the thrill of being wanted by someone who'd never really committed to anyone. And he'd done to her exactly what I'd known he would do, exactly what his pattern had always been, exactly what should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. He'd used her for whatever he could get, and the moment something shinier came along, someone younger and more useful to his non-existent career, he'd traded up without hesitation.
Chris added carefully, his voice tentative like he was approaching a wounded animal, that Brittany had been asking about me. She knew he was seeing me tonight and wanted to know if I was dating anyone, if I ever mentioned her, if I seemed happy or sad or angry. She was fishing for information, trying to figure out if there was still an opening, still a chance that I might be available for reconciliation. I thought about Nicole, the pediatric nurse I'd met at the rock climbing gym about 6 weeks earlier.
Nicole was smart and funny and straightforward, with her life completely together in a way that felt refreshing rather than intimidating. She had a career she was passionate about, friends she'd maintained since college, hobbies that didn't involve drama or chaos. When Nicole had a rough shift at work, when she lost a patient or dealt with difficult parents or navigated the bureaucracy of hospital administration, she didn't disappear for 12 hours. She didn't make me guess what was wrong or play games about whether she needed space or support. She just texted me about it, used actual words to communicate her feelings like a functional adult. We'd order Thai food from that place near her apartment and watch something mindless on Netflix, and she'd decompress by telling me about her day, about the kid who'd been scared of needles until she made a game of it, about the attending physician who still treated nurses like servants, about the small victories and frustrating setbacks. No manipulation, no tests, no weaponized vulnerability designed to make me prove my devotion. Just honest, direct communication between two people who respected each other. I told Chris to tell Brittany I was doing really well, better than I'd been in years actually, that I was genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been toward the end of our relationship, though I probably hadn't realized how unhappy I was until I had something to compare it to. Chris's eyebrows shot up, interested now, and I explained that I'd sold the ring about 3 weeks ago. I'd taken it to a reputable jeweler, not some pawn shop that would lowball me, and got a pretty good price for it. Not what I'd paid originally, because engagement rings depreciate the moment you buy them, but enough to make a real difference. I put the money toward my condo down payment, the place I'd just closed on last week, a 2-bedroom in a good neighborhood with parking and a balcony that got morning sun. Chris's expression shifted to something like awe, and I continued, feeling the satisfaction of it settle in my chest. I told him I also bought that vintage Ducati I'd been eyeing for 5 years, the one Brittany always vetoed because motorcycles were too dangerous. She'd acted like my wanting one was selfish and reckless, like I was choosing a death machine over our future together. Turns out she was the dangerous one, the real threat to my well-being and peace of mind. And the bike was the best decision I'd made in years. I'd taken it up the Pacific Coast Highway almost every weekend since I bought it, feeling the wind clear out the last cobwebs of that relationship. There's something about riding a motorcycle that demands complete presence, complete attention to the moment. You can't think about the past or worry about the future when you're leaning into curves at 60 miles per hour, when the ocean is crashing beside you and the road is unwinding ahead. It's meditative in a way nothing else is, just you and the machine and the road and the absolute necessity of being exactly where you are. 6 months had passed since that morning, and if you've never rebuilt your entire life from the ground up, let me tell you, it's genuinely addictive once you get past the hard part. The first month was brutal, exactly as bad as everyone says breakups are. Every morning waking up reaching for someone who wasn't there. Every evening coming home to silence that felt heavy and wrong. The second month was pure grinding through each day, existing but not really living, going through the motions of work and gym and sleep without feeling connected to any of it.
But by the 3rd month, something shifted fundamentally. I started realizing how much mental energy I'd been spending managing someone else's emotional state, walking on eggshells around her moods, trying to predict what would set her off or what would make her happy. How many of my own needs and wants had been putting aside to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to be the stable one who held everything together. I wasn't just free of Brittany specifically. I was free of the constant anxiety she'd called passion, free of the drama she'd labeled as caring deeply, free of the jealousy games and tests of my devotion that I'd somehow convinced myself were normal. I threw myself into everything I'd been putting on hold. I took on the complicated projects at work that nobody else wanted, the ones with tight deadlines and demanding clients and technical challenges that required creative problem solving. And I got noticed by upper management, got invited to meetings I'd never been included in before, got asked my opinion on major decisions. 6 months after the breakup, I got promoted to senior project manager with a 25% raise and my own office with a window. I bought that Ducati and took it up the Pacific Coast Highway almost every weekend, sometimes alone with my thoughts and the engine's roar, sometimes with Nicole riding behind me, her arms wrapped around my waist, trusting me to keep us safe. The wind cleared out everything, leaving just clarity and peace and the simple joy of movement. Nicole and I started building something real, something that felt fundamentally different from what I'd had before. No games, no manufactured drama, no tests I had to pass to prove I was worthy of basic respect. Just two adults with their lives together, choosing each other every day. One random Tuesday evening, about 7 months after everything ended, I was at this high-end furniture store, finally buying a new sectional for my condo. The place I'd bought with my own money, decorated to my own taste, filled with things I actually liked rather than compromises in her aesthetic preferences. No more inspirational throw pillows with meaningless phrases, no more decorative items that served no purpose except looking good on social media. I was testing out this charcoal gray leather sofa, sitting in different positions to check the comfort, when I felt it, that primal awareness that you're being watched, the sensation that raises the hair on the back of your neck and makes you turn around even though you don't know why. I turned around and standing about 20 feet away near the entrance, frozen like she'd seen a ghost, was Brittany. She looked diminished. That's the only word that fits, the only way to describe the change. She'd always carried herself with confidence that sometimes crossed into arrogance, walking into rooms like she owned them, making her presence known. But now she just looked small and defeated, wearing stained yoga pants and an oversized hoodie that might have been Tyler's, her hair in a messy bun with pieces falling out everywhere. She looked like she'd aged 5 years and 6 months, holding a cheap gas station iced coffee instead of the fancy oat milk latte she used to insist on, just staring at me like I was some kind of mirage, something her exhausted brain had conjured up. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing, no residual hurt or bitterness, just flat, complete indifference, like seeing an acquaintance from a job I'd left years ago, someone I'd once known but had no emotional connection to anymore. She hesitated for a long moment, clearly debating whether to approach, then started walking over with this uncertain gait, missing that confident stride she used to have.
When she got close enough to speak, she said my name, and her voice came out small and uncertain, like she wasn't sure I'd even acknowledge her. I nodded politely, the way you'd greet a stranger making conversation in a public place, and asked how she was, keeping my voice neutral and even. She blinked a few times, clearly thrown off by my calm tone, probably expecting anger or hoping I'd been miserable, needing me to still be emotionally invested enough to yell or accuse or demand explanations. She said she was okay, but it was obviously a lie. Everything about her screamed not okay, from her appearance to her energy to the desperate way she was looking at me. Her eyes darted over my tailored jacket, the nice leather boots I'd bought last month, the watch Nicole had given me for my birthday, then to the expensive sofa behind me with its visible price tag. She told me I looked really good, really happy, and I said simply that I was, because it was true and there was no reason to pretend otherwise. She bit her lower lip, and I could see the gears turning, calculating, looking for an opening, searching for the right words to create a crack in my armor. She mentioned my promotion, said congratulations, that she'd always said I'd end up running the whole place someday. I gently corrected her, keeping my tone conversational rather than accusatory, that she'd actually used to say I worked too much and needed to learn how to relax and have fun. But thanks anyway. She flinched like I'd slapped her. She asked if we could talk for just 5 minutes, said she'd tried texting me. I told her I'd blocked her number months ago. She said she knew that she deserved it, but she needed me to know that she'd messed up big time. She stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that felt desperate rather than intimate, and the smell hit me. Stale coffee and unwashed hair, and that desperate energy of someone barely holding it together, so different from the perfume and confidence she used to wear. She said Tyler was a massive, horrible mistake, and I checked my watch because I genuinely had dinner plans with Nicole in 45 minutes and needed to leave soon. I told her I knew about Tyler, that I'd heard through the grapevine, that it was a tale as old as time, really. The guy who couldn't commit, who used people, who cheated when something better came along. Predictable and sad, but not surprising. Real tears started forming in her eyes, spilling over, and she said he was truly awful, manipulative and draining and selfish, that he'd used her for money and a place to stay and emotional support, taken everything and given nothing back. That she was staying on Madison's couch now because she couldn't afford the apartment alone after he'd left her with his debts. I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch, let her keep talking and digging. She said that every time Tyler treated her like garbage, every time he chose himself over her, she thought of me, thought about how safe she'd always felt with me, how I'd never made her anxious or uncertain, how she'd always known exactly where she stood. Her hand hovered near my arm without quite touching, like she was afraid I'd pull away or disappear if she made contact. She said she missed us, missed her best friend, that she knew she'd broken my trust, but people change and learn from their mistakes. She'd grown so much over these months, learned what really mattered, understood now what she'd thrown away. We could start over slowly, she said. She could prove she'd changed, prove she understood now what love actually meant. This was the moment she'd probably rehearsed.